A bell starts tolling, not the Sunday bell, the funeral bell, and in the wax-thick air of a crowded church you can almost taste smoke. As 13 flames tremble in the dark, 1 bishop, 12 priests, a ring of light that feels less like prayer and more like a courtroom. Then comes the sound you don't expect in a holy place. Lit candles hurled down and extinguished on stone, one after another. Like a life being snuffed out on purpose. And here's the shock. This isn't a folk tale. It's a formal rite described in church tradition, and associated with practice going back at least to the late 9th century. So medieval Europe had a sanctioned ritual for making someone socially untouchable for centuries. So what did it look like to be spiritually killed in public? While you're still alive, still breathing, still standing there with everyone watching. And the taboo question is simple. If a church can turn off your religious life with theater, what else can it turn off? Your friends, your work, your safety, and your right to exist in your own town. Today we're going inside the ritual later nicknamed bell, book, and candle, a solemn form of major excommunication, anathema, where a bishop publicly pronounces the sentence and the ceremony ends with a bell, a closed book, and candles extinguished, to signal you are treated as spiritually dead to the community, and by the end you'll know exactly how the ritual worked, why it terrified entire towns, why it survived as a proverb, shut the book, quench the candle, ring the bell, and why it kept returning whenever institutions needed obedience at scale. Plus, I'm teasing 2 payoffs you won't forget. First, how excommunication could be turned into mass political pressure so broad that ordinary villagers had to be taught. Its consequences clause by clause. And second, the twist where spiritual punishment starts behaving like a tool for enforcing very worldly disputes, credit, debt, reputation, property. So is this about saving souls or controlling bodies? In theory, excommunication is supposed to work like severe medicine, not a death sentence. It cuts you off from the sacraments and from normal religious life to push you toward repentance and return. And the ritual symbols are meant to make that message unforgettable. Bell is public announcement. Book is the authority of the words and the record. Candle as your light being cut off, while still implying it could be restored if you submit. And here's what that normal intended outcome looks like. When it actually works, your name is spoken in a place the town can't ignore. Faces turn, whispers ripple. Someone crosses themselves like you're contagious, and suddenly the punishment jumps from theology into the street. Because medieval logic often framed contact as dangerous, like spiritual leprosy. So friends are pressured not to eat with you, not to trade, not to talk, not to shelter you, and you can feel your life narrowing to the width of an alley. And it wasn't only for nobodies either, because the system wanted to prove it could put even high people under a cloud. Look at Robert II of France. Excommunicated over a marriage judged unlawful until he was reconciled. A reminder that a crown didn't make you untouchable if the church believed the crowd would enforce the boundary. And if you want the purest version of the norm, imagine the best case ending the church hoped for. The person breaks, appears, submits, makes amends, is absolved, and the town turns the lights back on. But here's the contrast question. What happens when the crowd doesn't enforce it? Or when powerful people learn to aim the ritual like a weapon instead of a cure? Now watch the failure mode. Because when enforcement slips, the system compensates by turning the theater up to maximum. The bishop pronounces a formula that doesn't just scold but separates. Cut off from the society of Christians, excluded. Words designed to make everyone in the building feel that you're not merely guilty, you're hazardous. And the assistants answer in a chilling chorus, fiat, 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 as if the room itself is agreeing to your erasure. Then the ritual lands its jump scare. The bell rings, the book is closed like a verdict, and the 12 priests dash their candles down until the flames die. So the church goes visually colder at the exact moment your status changes, and the crowd doesn't just hear a sentence, they witness a symbolic extinguishing. And then comes the part that makes it true system horror. Paperwork, written notices sent outward so neighboring priests and bishops know the target and the reason. And the punishment travels faster than you can run, turning the map itself against you. Because social death only works if everyone knows who is marked and why. Now imagine the consequence years later, the slow version. the one that doesn't fit modern attention spans but destroyed medieval lives. You're alive but treated like a walking hazard, locked out of the sacramental rhythms that structured time. And, worse, locked out of relationships, business, and protection, because even people who pity you fear the stain will spread. And yet here's the pattern interrupt that snaps the story sideways. Some famous excommunicates didn't collapse on cue. King John of England lived under excommunication for years and still ruled. So if this ritual can fail against power, why did it still terrify ordinary people? And who benefits from controlling the stage? Here's the hidden engine: logistics. Excommunication is a coordination technology that turns belief into synchronized human behavior in a world without modern policing or mass media. A way to outsource enforcement to the crowd by making the crowd feel morally responsible. And once you can make an entire community avoid a person, you can enforce compliance at scale, which is why publicity becomes the beating heart of the sanction. Publication is not an accessory, it's the mechanism. Because shunning only happens when people have been told, repeatedly, who to shun and why. Now watch the engine operate like a machine. A person refuses to comply. Maybe they ignore a court summons, refuse to pay, refuse to restore property, refuse to stop doing what they're doing. So the system escalates: warning, sentence, public proclamation, outward notice, and then the community becomes the enforcement arm. Not because anyone loves cruelty, but because the ritual makes non-compliance feel like a threat to everyone's spiritual safety. And here's where the profit and logistics twist bites. Once you have a mechanism that can pressure behavior without swords, it gets pulled into disputes that look like pure economics. And in late medieval France, church courts could excommunicate debtors at the request of creditors in huge numbers, making a spiritual penalty function like a lever inside the credit system. Especially in an economy where small transactions and trust networks mattered. So the fear of social isolation becomes a tool to make people pay, appear, or settle. That's the mini-loop. The bell doesn't just announce sin, it announces enforceable obligation. So if this engine can be used to discipline individuals, what happens when it's aimed at whole political orders and entire populations? Now shift into the next setting, same theme, new rules. Because by the 13th century in England, excommunication could be used as a broadcast threat attached to law and politics. Proclaimed and repeated so everyone knows who is marked and why, turning religion into a loudspeaker for compliance. And part of the fear was instructional. Ordinary Christians needed to understand what actions could trigger sanctions, so teachings had to be repeated and made comprehensible. And for a second example, zoom out to the way publicity itself becomes the weapon. Once excommunication is published, it can be used to vilify individuals, condemn causes, and steer reputations, because it creates a public label that follows you. So even if you can technically survive it, you can't easily outrun the story people now tell about you. And here's the delayed cleanup twist, the one that haunts long after the ritual ends. Even when a sentence is lifted, even when absolution happens, the social stain doesn't always vanish on command. Letters were sent, names were spoken, the bell rang, and people remember the theater. So can any authority truly unsend a public curse once a village has tasted it? Now let's flip the myth. Because most people assume excommunication was an instant medieval kill switch that always worked like magic. But the truth is more dangerous and more human. It was powerful precisely because it depended on community enforcement, and that made it volatile. Some communities complied, some resisted, some ignored it for the right person, some negotiated around it, and the church itself had to keep republicizing, repeating, and escalating. Because the sanction's power lived in the crowd's behavior, not in lightning from the sky. And another myth says anathema meant the church was personally sentencing someone to final damnation. But the logic described in the tradition frames it as a juridical censure aimed at correction and return, not a claim to replace divine judgment. So if it wasn't guaranteed doom, why did it still feel like death? Here's the final answer. Bell, book, and candle looked like ritual theater engineered to trigger crowd enforcement. A bell to announce you like the dead, a book to close your case with institutional authority. Candles dashed down and extinguished to show your light is cut off. Because the real punishment wasn't only spiritual, it was social, and it worked through three stacked motives. A spiritual motive to shock you into repentance by cutting you off from sacramental life and declaring the boundary of communion. A social motive to isolate you by treating contact as dangerous so the community turns into locked doors. And a governance motive to scale compliance by making the sentence portable through public proclamation, written notices, and repeat publication. If you want more documentaries like this, subscribe, because the next story is about the other medieval system nobody expects. And now tell me in the comments, honestly, if you lived in that town, would you obey the ritual and cut the person off, or would you risk the contagion and help them anyway, and why?